He is merely an inexperienced driver who left high school. Disregard him. What? Richard scowled at what Nancy had said. Comprehensive. We'll terminate all of our agreements with your business. What? Nancy was taken aback by Richard's firm statement. Go now, please. We'll inquire further on the contract's termination. Richard meant business. I was persuaded that he was really going to terminate our contract. Wait a moment, please. Richard was ready to exit the meeting room when I stopped him and gave him my business card. Wait, Will? How come? It has been a long time. Hello, I'm Will Wilson, I said. Richard let out an enthusiastic wow. Richard, who appeared sincere in his happiness to see me, started crying and shouted, So you've come back. I couldn't resist getting emotional as well. I left Nancy completely bewildered and followed Richard out of the meeting room. My name is Will Wilson, and I work for an auto parts manufacturer. About 100 people work for our company, which includes 3 U.S. branches and 1 abroad. Actually, I was in charge of establishing the branch office abroad. I started working at the foreign branch 15 years ago and have been abroad ever since. I was old enough to be promoted to manager at the time, 49 years old. I continued to work as a regular employee, even when my friends were promoted. That's because I had a heavy sense of inadequacy over my school experience. I simply completed middle school. I never attended high school. The oldest of my 4 siblings is myself. My father moved out of our home while I was in my 2nd year of middle school to be with another lady. My mother was not well and would quickly become ill if she attempted to work a full-time job. She was the sweetest lady, though, and prioritized her kids above anything else. It was inevitable that, coming from a household like that, I would begin working rather than attending high school. There were a lot of venues in which middle school graduates could get employment back then. The quantity of laborers and their drive were frequently appreciated more during the time of economic expansion than their level of education. I was hired by an auto manufacturing to work on the production line. This plant was a subcontractor of a subcontractor for a big automaker, but it was close to my house, which was a determining factor, and the compensation was good for the time. I don't remember much about the short entry exam, but I do faintly remember it being there. I was able to get the job, and I spent around 13 years working at the factory. Since I frequently worked nights, I may have had the best pay in the factory. 13 years on, I had to make a decision. I received a job offer from the parent firm, which is currently my employer. I had been working very hard up until that point to pay for my younger brother's college education. But by then, I was beginning to feel exhausted. That was the year of my youngest brother's college graduation. My motivation to work hard was renewed after I transferred to the main business. I joined my current job at the age of 28, and at 39, I received an international assignment. The first few years of living overseas were difficult because of language and cultural hurdles, but I got used to it really quickly. I am appreciative of my wife, Maria, for accompanying me despite the uncertainty of relocating abroad. When Maria and I were engaged, that's when my assignment abroad was decided. Moving to a developing country may have raised some eyebrows, but Maria graciously agreed to accompany me. In addition, Maria delivered birth nearby 5 years after our relocation. Maria is incredibly strong, having gone through childbirth and raising a child in a strange place. Our family of 4 stayed overseas for 2 years after the birth of our 2nd child, and then we all came back to the United States together. When it returned to the United States 15 years later, the company was very different. Although I was stationed at the central office, the majority of my close friends and coworkers were now managers at other branches. Since this organization often doesn't hire recent middle school grads, I didn't have any peers when I first started. I was put in charge of the accounting division. To be honest, I was really perplexed because the work was totally different from what I had been doing. I was wondering why I was in accounting at this point in my life, as I had to learn everything from scratch. The fact that John Taylor, my previous subordinate, worked in the accounting division was something for which I was thankful. John gave me such a warm greeting when I returned from my trip abroad. I never imagined Will would work in our division. It's a pleasure working with you once more. John's enthusiasm calmed my nerves. Being in a department that I was absolutely unfamiliar with caused me anxiety. John, it's a pleasure to collaborate with you once more. I never thought you'd work your way up to manager. John claimed, it's just seniority, that's all. But I knew his abilities were the reason behind his promotion. John always planned ahead and made the appropriate decisions, which helped him always place highly in sales even when we were coworkers. Though I was older than John, there were several occasions when I felt he might outperform me. John's promotion to manager was therefore inevitable. I take it that the department head is away on business. Did she not join through mid-career recruitment? Given that she joined after I did, I think I missed her. Nancy Miller, the head of the accounting department, is 48 years old, making her 6 years my junior. I've never met her because she joined the company shortly after I was sent overseas. However, someone has to be exceptionally talented to be promoted at such an early age. Yes, a business trip, I guess. I cocked my head in response to John's ambiguous response. How come he was acting so evasive? Isn't she on a business trip? It's a business trip, but... In a whisper, John said, I'll elaborate later. There seemed to be some conditions around Nancy, but I didn't understand. Though I had to concentrate on learning my work, I was interested. I sat at my desk with that thinking. After being assigned to the accounting department for 3 days, I was beginning to understand the daily responsibilities. Nancy finally returned to the workplace after her business trip. She entered the room wearing what appeared to be an ostentatious suit, bright red lipstick, and long black hair that fell to her waist. She appeared to be a very successful professional woman. I welcomed her, saying, I'm Will Wilson, recently assigned here. Oh, you're that guy, Nancy remarked, laughing through her nose. The moron who left high school early. Was he really so useless that they shipped him abroad? Having so much dead weight in my department is the worst thing ever. Nancy told me something that I couldn't believe. That was definitely not the appropriate thing to say to a complete stranger. Furthermore, I wasn't demoted for my abroad assignment. Chan spoke up and said, Excuse me, Nancy, with all due respect, Will wasn't sent overseas because he was incompetent or foolish. I was a little relieved to see John's cheeks flush, because I knew he often did that when he was really pissed up. Nancy, you do know what Will accomplished overseas, right? What? I'm not sure. Why should I be aware of an employee's actions? She seemed to me to epitomize the word arrogant. She was undoubtedly very proud of herself and thought she was the best. He was sent to that impoverished, dusty developing nation after all. A demotion is the only possible explanation. In fact, the developing nation to which I was posted was home to individuals who lived in nearly collapsing, dust-covered cottages in the countryside. But I was living in the capital, which wasn't all that dissimilar from an American little city. Convenience stores and an American school were present. Although there was a noticeable wealth disparity, the adage, home is where you make it, proved accurate, and the generosity and friendliness of the locals really benefited my family. Nancy, the country is not as horrible as you believe. There are lots of American visitors and the food is excellent. Above all, the folks are friendly. That just seems like the lame excuse of a sore loser. It must smell awful too. That nation has a bad reputation. Everyone in the room felt she had overreached herself. John appeared as though he would leap at her. Nancy, you ought to go to that nation. Once you experience it for yourself, it's incredibly pleasant. Nancy seemed taken aback by my composed reply, perhaps anticipating a backlash. John shot me a beseeching look like he was trying to say, Please stand up to her more, but I was not going to say anything. Yes, that was over the top, but she didn't have to go that far. But I didn't feel furious. Although I don't think she intended good, everyone has different morals. Permit anyone who choose to speak to do so. You spent 15 years overseas, and I was curious about your personality. It seems like all you are is a coward. You get it. Please try not to bring us down. Since I'm in charge here, Everything I say stands. I appreciate any guidance you can offer, I said. Nancy gave a quick tongue click and turned to leave. Nancy called me the following day to invite me to a business meeting. I'll teach you directly because it appears that you don't understand anything about accounting work. You know, we are in fact in commercial negotiations. You handled one last, say, 15 years ago. Since it's likely that you've forgotten by now, let me to demonstrate. She looked anxious to brag about something, but to be honest, I don't think there's much more to learn about business negotiations at my age. John had said yesterday that Nancy was always strutting her stuff, whether it was her new hair color, nails, or accessories. He claimed that if you give her credit for whatever it is that she is bragging about, she would be happy and easier to get along with. Jan expressed this with a frustrated expression, not realizing that her colleagues shared this opinion. Nancy started talking about her previous experiences negotiating. I nodded and said something like, "I see, that's impressive," or "You're amazing." Nancy led me to a client of ours, a car manufacturing business that has been a longtime partner. They were a significant customer of ours, buying big quantities of the parts we produced. This manufacturer will employ our parts in their new automobile engine production. The price is the reason we're here. Obtaining a long-term contract is my goal. Well, the transaction is assured while I'm here. Although I didn't know where her confidence came from, I said, "I see. There shouldn't be too much difficulty in the negotiation if the contract was already decided." A man my age entered the meeting room where Nancy and I were waiting. "Thank you for coming to see us, Richard. Thank you for your time." "No issue." "Nancy, it's a pleasure to have you here." It would have been Oak with the regular representation. When Richard said this, Nancy grinned happily. Still, it was obvious that he intended for Nancy to stay away. Nancy was undoubtedly bothersome to Richard as well. Since it's a significant event, I must initiate it. "Who is this, and how?" Richard turned to face me as he attempted to change the topic. Nancy stopped me just as I was nodding and about to give her my business card. "Oh, don't worry about him," the woman remarked. "He is merely an inexperienced driver who left high school. Disregard him." Richard scowled at what Nancy had said. "What do you mean by that?" "He's a useless employee who joined us in the middle of his career and dropped out of high school. After serving a 15-year demotion overseas, he was just assigned to our team. It is inconvenient." Nancy's awful comments were presumably the subject of Richard's "What do you mean?" question, but she persisted in talking about utterly unrelated topics. Nancy didn't see that Richard's expression hardened as he listened. "Nancy, do you really mean what you're saying? What is meant by the word serious? Since I don't enjoy jokes, I always say what's on my mind." After hearing Nancy's reply, Richard sighed deeply. "Comprehensive. We'll terminate all of our agreements with your business." Nancy was taken aback by Richard's firm declaration. "You're joking." Since I dislike jokes as well, I always express my opinions. Someone who handles their subordinates that way is not someone I want to do business with. There was absolutely no smile in Richard's eyes. He appeared truly disdainful. "Hold on, I was only expressing the truth. He was sent overseas for a demotion and is actually a real high school dropout. Are you really that interested in education? To be clear, my brother did not even complete high school, and I simply completed my education. It was normal practice back then to begin working after middle school. The emphasis on education was not as great as it is now, and attending college was out of reach for those without money. Many gifted individuals never attended high school or college. When Nancy saw that Richard's sibling had also completed middle school, her face went pale. Considering the size of Richard's company's orders, terminating the contract would be a serious setback for our business. "Go now, please. We will get in touch with you to discuss our contract's ending." "No, wait." Richard started packing up his supplies without even glancing at the dumbfounded Nancy. Richard meant business. I had no doubts that he was sincere in his intentions to terminate our agreement. My head hurt when I saw Nancy question Richard, Why are you so angry? How on earth could she not know this by now? Prior to passing judgment on the educational backgrounds of others, she had to focus on honing her own comprehension abilities. Richard appeared to be frustrated by her inquiry and appeared to feel the same way. We are not going far by talking to you. We will be moving our business elsewhere because we can obtain the products we require from other vendors. Wait a moment, please. Richard was ready to exit the meeting room when I stopped him. I abruptly intervened, frightening Nancy, who said, "You stay quiet." Disregarding her, I gave Richard my business card. The card was newly printed this morning, and it was brand new. When Richard noticed the name printed on it, his eyes grew wide as he took it in a perplexed manner. "Wait, Will? How come? It has been a long time. I'm Will Wilson." Richard gave me a warm greeting and said, "Wow. It has been a while. Will, you appear well." "Yes, I appreciate that. Richard, I'm shocked to see you in a managerial role." Richard gave me a hearty pat on the shoulder. "You're the impressive one." "So, you're back," he remarked with a sincere smile and sad eyes. I couldn't resist getting emotional as well. Nancy said incoherently as she stood there, "Ah." However, we disregarded her. I had so much catching up to do with Richard. "Ah, what kind of relationship do you two have?" Nancy chimed in. "Do you remain here? Simply walk out. I would like to speak with Will." Quite the opposite of his previous demeanor, Richard answered Nancy's question with a stern smile. His icy demeanor nearly brought Nancy to tears. "Regarding terminating the agreement, we will sign any agreement if Will is our agent. However, Nancy has been barred from our organization. I'd rather not see your face. Just get out of there fast." "No way." Nancy gave a gasp. Richard joyfully said to me, "Tell me about your time overseas," ignoring the puzzled Nancy. "I take it that you haven't had lunch yet. Let's head to the food." "What's going on?" As Richard and I exited the conference room together, Nancy muttered in complete confusion. Richard and I had a fancy steak lunch that day. We had a good chat about my experience abroad, but lunch was too short to address everything. "Come on, let's grab a drink," Richard said. "I want to hear so much," as he waved goodbye. John greeted me with a concerned expression as soon as I entered the office again. "Has Nancy had any incidents?" She departed early after returning, obviously upset. John grinned and said, "Well, that's convenient for me." This made me smile. There were a few problems throughout the talks rally. Perhaps it's best for her to experience some sadness. "Well, I suppose so," John acknowledged with a nod. To be honest, Nancy said some really inappropriate things during the negotiation. Not just Richard, but anyone would have been offended. I went back to work, thinking that tomorrow might be a little unpleasant with Nancy. Nevertheless, Nancy failed to show up for work the following day. If there was no communication, the absence was deemed unjustified. I was wondering if she had been in an accident or something that prevented her from getting in touch with us. But Nancy was still nowhere to be found at the end of the day. Nancy was back within 2 days. Despite notifying anyone, she showed up for work unapologetic and as if nothing had happened. She should at least say something to John, who had done all the work, even though I didn't mind if she didn't say anything to me. "Nancy, can I talk to you for a moment?" John inquired. He was speaking to her in front of all the staff members. Everyone was interested to hear what he had to say. "What? Are you having issues?" Nancy lost her temper. "Nothing from me, please. Whether you are here or not has no bearing on the work I conduct. Still, the boss has to speak with you. As soon as you arrived, he invited you to come to his office." With a frustrated sigh, Nancy said, "What a hassle." How she could have such a negative attitude in this scenario was beyond me. It was presumably because of her unexcused absences that she was in trouble when she was called to the CEO's office. "It's all your fault," Nancy said with a tongue click and a scowl before heading out of the office. I got an internal call about an hour later. "Will, can you come to the CEO's office for a moment?" It was the CEO, appearing worn out. I was discouraged when I heard someone yelling in the background and realized it was Nancy. Understood. I'll be right there. John, who had overheard, said, "Sorry about this," with concern. "Are you going to the CEO's office?" "Yeah, the CEO seems disturbed, and I heard Nancy yelling. I'm on my way over." With excitement, John answered, "I'll come with you." I think he was concerned about me. John accompanied me to the CEO's office since I couldn't come up with a reason to decline. Nancy was shouting hysterically as we got closer, and John and I looked at each other. Nancy was still screaming at the CEO, who was sitting there looking completely weary when we walked in. "John, are you all right? You're also present. Kindly take action against her," the CEO begged. "My head feels like it's going to split." The phrase "do something about her" is confusing. "I'll be the next CEO's sweetheart," Nancy exclaimed in a strident manner. Nancy's revelation startled John, who turned to face me. "That's not true, right?" I said the words, "It can't be," in shock. John smiled sardonically and nodded. "She hasn't been coherent for some time now." John said, "Even my dog makes more sense." The CEO exhaled deeply, appearing exhausted. "I'm gonna be the next CEO's girlfriend, I swear." "How are you going to fire me?" "Who is the next CEO, in your opinion? Since I am the one doing it." Nancy let out a cry. Nancy heard my comments and immediately stopped ranting, asking, "What are you talking about?" with a flick of her eyes. "I'm going to be this company's next CEO. I'm returning to help with the transition as the current CEO is departing in 5 years." "Stop being absurd. The VP will be the next CEO," Nancy shouted. The vice president had a bad reputation for being inept. He gained access through relationships and was a relative of one of the executives. With nothing to do, he was assigned to the vice president role, a well-known reality in our organization. Nancy seems to be talking about being his girlfriend, but I seem to recall that he has a wife and children. "There's no way we let someone who can't do anything become the CEO," I replied quietly. "But the VP has a college degree, right?" Nancy's face twisted in desperation as she implored. The CEO let out a frustrated sigh. The vice president's family's money allowed him to enroll in a mediocre university. He played around for 4 years. What use does a degree like this serve? Will, on the other hand, put in a lot of work for his family and joined this corporation right out of middle school. He is far more worthy. John gave a firm nod. "But still, a college graduate is better than a middle school graduate," Nancy replied. "It's likely that you are unaware, but our admission exam is rather challenging. It measures raw intellect by testing logical and numerical reasoning in addition to academic knowledge." The vice president was far from passing. The CEO remarked with a sour face, "We just hired him because of his connections." I was aware of Will. A highly skilled and diligent middle school graduate was employed at the factory. We chose to hire him based on the manufacturing manager's recommendation. Will did remarkably well on the entrance exam. I was working 12 hours a day at the time, with 2 days off each month. I had pleaded for longer hours because I needed the money to help my brothers pay for college. My efforts must have been noted by the manufacturing manager. Since joining our organization, Will has put in a lot of effort. I knew I wanted Will to be our branch manager when we chose to open one abroad. Despite his recent marriage, I thought he was the ideal candidate for this kind of responsibility. Without a doubt, Will was the sales department's shining star. I could see how extraordinary he was, even if I was always in second. I was given the abroad assignment since the organization had high standards. It was intolerable to fail. Everyone was aware that the company's future would be greatly impacted by the foreign branch's performance. Setting up shop abroad wasn't simple. The people there mistreated me, threw rocks at me on a regular basis, and would purposefully only communicate in their language to express how much they detested me. But even so, I never planned on going back to the United States. I was resolved to meet and exceed the expectations of the entire corporation that entrusted me with this task. Maria's support by my side was also a major influence. I was committed to seeing this project through to the end. It was only natural for me to have different values and ways of thinking from the natives. Our upbringing was in utterly dissimilar cultures. That's why you never seemed to get upset with Nancy. As a result of that encounter, I gave John's statements a nod. While I went abroad, I heard a lot of nasty comments, yet getting upset over tiny things wouldn't solve the problem. In 5 years, we'll open the branch, and he stayed on for 10 more. The local staff now respects the American workers and works hard. That's because Will established a positive rapport with them. When I saw that, I realized Will was the sole candidate to succeed me as CEO. When I learned that I would be the new CEO, I was shocked. It was honorable as well as unexpected. I received the impression that my efforts had been noticed. Both inside and outside the company, Will enjoys a large following. Making the transition from middle school graduate to CEO is like something out of a play. Will has a lot of admirers, including Richard. When I worked in sales, he was one of my customers. He was quite supportive, but also apprehensive when I received the abroad assignment, even though he had treated me very well before. As he listened, the CEO nodded in agreement. It is therefore very forbidden to disparage Will in front of Richard. Richard still exudes anger. He suggested that we fire you, Nancy, when he called this morning. Why am I the one getting fired? For the first time, I realized why Nancy had been summoned to the CEO's office. Even if Richard's comments alone would make it difficult to fire her, her previous unexcused absences and her involvement with the VP were additional problems. We have been serving Richard's organization as a big client for a considerable amount of time. I've heard that you spoke to him harshly at times. Nancy attempted to justify herself. I was just stating the facts, but she trailed off as she saw her situation getting worse. You weren't performing the majority of your manager responsibilities, I've also heard. Has John not been filling in for you? As he said, the CEO sighed. Over the preceding 3 days, I'd heard that Nancy's subordinates had John double-check everything before gaining her sign-off, because she was so prone to errors in her approvals. Nancy was essentially a symbolic person. The executive meeting is where your fate will be determined. For too long, you got your way. Be ready for the proper repercussions. No, hold on. I've had a lot of stuff to do. This is excessive. Nancy spoke with tears in her eyes. But I wasn't sure what precisely she had been putting a lot of effort into. She spent much of her time having an affair with the VP and hardly worked at all. It was discovered that she had taken a vacation with the VP in lieu of her recent business trip. There would be repercussions for her as well. Nancy doesn't seem to be doing a very good job at her job. It doesn't seem like much of a purpose to acquire a degree if it means becoming like her and the VP, to be honest. John laughed at what I had said. Nancy, flushed, said nothing. She was not going to recover. All right, that brings an end to our conversation. I'm sorry to call you in, Will John. Now you may resume your work. Nancy, wait until your sentence is decided before coming to the office. Nancy was distraught after hearing the CEO's stern statement. John and I ignored her and walked out of the CEO's office. It was then agreed that Nancy would be let go with cause. The primary causes included her harsh comments to staff members, her unexcused absences, her conduct during negotiations, and her liaison with the vice president. The vice president stated icily that it was only a fling, despite Nancy's claims that she was his major partner. Despite not divorcing him due to the affair, the VP's wife requested a sizable compensation from Nancy. Nancy's awful remarks on her social media were discovered by the VP's wife, who works in the entertainment business. After it was discovered through a disclosure request that Nancy was the source of the remarks, more compensation demands were made. Nancy had lost everything in an instant, was deeply in debt, was unable to pay her rent, and her flat was taken away from her. It's said that she's living almost on the streets these days. Maria and the children adjusted to American life quite fast. The children had never lived in Los Angeles, so I was a little concerned. But they made friends at school and had more life experience than most children their age. As for me, I put forth a lot of effort every day in the accounting department. I work with John as a manager every day because I was brought into this area to gain knowledge of the business's finances before to becoming CEO. Will, you're becoming too proficient at your work. If things continue this way, by next month, you'll be taking on the role of CEO. John has adopted this as his new catchphrase. Every day, he expresses his desire for me to continue working in the accounting department. I don't think he'll be next month, but isn't it hard for you to work with me here? Not at all. The staff think highly of you, more than you realize. After middle school, you put your brothers through college by working at the factory, and now you're slated to become the company's CEO. It's simply too awesome. I've seen that after I returned, the way that employees view me has dramatically changed from before I left. Many colleagues had doubts about my ability to handle the overseas assignment prior to my departure. Still, the foreign branch is already quite profitable, and plans to open another are even being discussed. Everyone looks at me with respect since employee bonuses have increased dramatically, and the CEO openly credits me for this. By the way, it seems Richard's company has proposed expanding our business together. Yes, Richard brought it up explicitly when we just went out to drink. It's a fantastic chance. Richard's announcement that he will take over as CEO of his company startled me. It's not hyperbole to suggest that Richard is in charge there right now. Richard wants to increase our business operations because he has developed a strong liking for me. The CEO constantly setting new goals for me when I was feeling aimless. I will be this company's CEO in 5 years. I'm going to use every resource at my disposal to keep every employee safe.